What's up, guys? We've got a special episode for you. Polina, my wife, is back one more time. And in this conversation, we talk about what is going on with the U.S. economy, Federal Reserve interest rate decisions, how you should be thinking about the new economic plan put forward by Vice President Harris and their taxing of unrealized capital gains. We then get into the recent arrest of the Telegram founder and CEO, what's going on in France, how you should be thinking about that situation. And then lastly, we cover it up and end talking all about the two astronauts that are stranded in space and why the difference of cultures at Boeing and SpaceX may tell us much more about the current state of engineering firms in the United States than you realize. I'm really enjoying doing these episodes. Hopefully, they are rational views that are much more moderate conversations that try to get into the nuance of these topics. If you enjoy these, please leave a comment. Let us know any feedback you have. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you want to see more of? If enough people leave positive feedback, we'll continue to do these. So I hope you're enjoying it. Here is my conversation with Polina Pompliano. All right, Polina, so what's the first topic you got?
All right, we have unrealized capital gains tax. Kamala Harris came out and said that she supports Biden's last budget proposal, which called for new taxes on wealthy Americans, corporations, and business owners, including a controversial idea to tax unrealized capital gains as income for those with more than 100 million. I've seen a lot of commentary online, but I feel like a lot of people are kind of uninformed on what that means. Can you tell us what it actually means?
Well, there's a whole bunch to unpack here. The first thing that I'll say is taxes are collected to pay for things that are supposed to be for the collective good. And so if you think about the more we spend, the more the government says we need to collect more taxes. Mm-hmm. So they are constantly in search of these, creative ways to drive more tax revenue because we operate at a deficit, which means that we're spending more than we're taking in. And we have a national debt that's $34 trillion and only growing in size. And so if you want to solve a lot of problems, it's not to take in more tax revenue. It's actually just stop spending so indiscriminately. Stop spending like a drunken sailor. But that's not going to happen. It is very hard to see a political candidate getting into office and actually balancing the budget. It's been over 20 years since we've had a balanced budget. Neither one of the candidates are running on a truly balanced budget.
Wait, just really quick. Why was that such an important thing back in the day to run on, I'm going to balance the budget? And now it feels like they don't care about that anymore.
Well, to be fair, I think that, take President Trump is running and he's saying, look, we are spending too much. There's been talk of a government efficiency committee and things like that. And so on one hand, there's this idea of like, we should be spending less, but that is kind of a watered down version of what is now an extreme view, which is we should actually have the balanced budget, right? And so we've gone from kind of the metric of success in the campaign as a balanced budget to simply now just like, let's spend less money. Like that is okay. You're checking the box as a candidate if you say we should spend less, whereas it used to be you check the box only if you commit to a balanced budget. But again, for over 20 years, we haven't had that. Now, when it comes to the spending problem, well, if you're not going to stop spending, then you do need to collect more tax receipts in order to be able to fund that, or you've got to increase the debt. And so they're looking for all kinds of different things. I've talked, quite a bit throughout the years about New York City. So at the city level, not at the national level, but at the city level, was going to be the first to introduce this congestion tax. And the whole idea was if you drove beneath 59th Street during work hours, Monday through Friday, they were essentially going to hit you with, anywhere between a $12 to $22 tax.
An Uber driver warned me about that and told me to walk. I was like,
so that was the thing, if you live on 60th, 61st, 65th,
no, it made sense.
Maybe you would actually walk until, below 59th and then get the Uber. So why were they doing it? They're looking for a creative way to drive more tax revenue, right? And obviously citizens want certain services, but they don't want to pay more tax. Mm-hmm. Taxing unrealized capital gains is a similar type of thing. It is looking for some sort of creative way to get more tax revenue. So you got to understand the problem that the politicians are trying to solve in order to start to unpack what actually is going on here. Now, taxing unrealized capital gains, this is not the first time it's been suggested. President Biden has previously suggested it. Some others have as well.
But every time it's suggested, it just spreads like wildfire and people go crazy.
It's a very controversial idea. Now, what I will say is because this has been suggested so many times, the idea has been, quote unquote, improving. And I put improving in quotes because what they really are trying to do is they are essentially iterating every time it is suggested to offend less people, but still get it passed. And so when it first was suggested, it was suggested as we're going to tax unrealized gains as a broad-based
like a
application.
Blanket, yeah.
And so the problem with that would be that every American who owns a home,
yes,
if their house goes up in value, they owe taxes on the appreciation of their home. So immediately, why is it controversial? Because a bunch of people raise their hand and say, well, wait a second, how are you going to appraise the home? We can't even agree on what the home is worth. So how are you going to be able to do that? Now they do property taxes and things like that. So there are, a pathway there. The second thing would be, well, most American families don't have the money to pay the taxes on the potential appreciation of their home. So are they going to have to sell their house to be able to get the money to pay the taxes? That kind of defeats the purpose of owning a home. Then the third thing was, well, that's when a home appreciates. But what happens if a home depreciates? Do you get a tax refund or a tax credit? Right. So there's all these different components that kind of feed into it. And so people basically came to the conclusion, this is a horrible idea. Politicians went away and they didn't try to pass it. And they came back and they said, okay, we're going to now suggest it again. This time it doesn't include your primary home. But then people said, okay, well, does that mean that if I'm a startup founder and I create a company that if the company goes from being worth $5 million to $25 million, I owe taxes on the $20 million markup of which I don't have the liquidity for? Are you then, if the company goes to zero, going to refund me that money because I went from 25 million down to zero? How does that work? Am I going to have to sell my company essentially to the government? Is the government going to nationalize my company because they're going to keep taking this tax, right? And so again, the politicians said, oh, that's a hot topic. That's controversial. Let's go away. And they came back. And now the latest proposal is if you have $100 million net worth or more, you are subject to this idea. So if you're below $100 million, all of a sudden they've absolved you from caring, right? Or complaining about this. So there are a lot of people who I saw online saying, well, why are you complaining about unrealized capital gains?
This is applying to a very
just
small
rich people.
percentage.
I don't have $100 million. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, it's actually pretty smart. I disagree with it, but it's smart strategy from the politicians. The second thing is they said that 80% of that $100 million or more net worth has to be liquid tradable assets. So if you're worth $100 million, but it's all in private illiquid startup stock, you aren't subject to this either. So it then says pretty much you got to have cash, you got to have stocks, right? Or maybe some sort of commodity, etc. So it comes down to, I think the number I saw was somewhere between 9 to 10,000 people in America of the 300 plus million Americans would actually be subjected to this. And what is hilarious to me is that maybe all of the tax revenue could fund the US government for like 24 hours. So again, we've spent all this time, energy, et cetera, going after this. It doesn't even solve the problem that they're trying to solve. And so the worry is that you start out with people over $100 million with 80% liquid assets, kind of all this stuff. Income tax at the federal level in the United States originally started out to pay for war. And it was first implemented. And then many people don't know that it was actually ruled after that to be unconstitutional. Then there was another ruling that said, well, actually, it's okay. It is constitutional to put the federal income tax. That federal income tax first started out as something that targeted, there's debate at the time as to the population size, somewhere between 1% to 3% of all Americans were subject to federal income tax. And then the percentage that they had to pay of their income was around 1%. So 1% to 3% of all Americans originally were taxed at a 1% rate. Doesn't seem that crazy. 99% or 95% of Americans don't care. They're not trying to tax me. They're just trying to tax the wealthy people. Today, more than 50% of Americans pay income tax, and the tax rate can be as high as more than 50% for some of those Americans. Yeah. And so the fear of introducing the idea of taxing unrealized capital gains is that you go from, hey, we're just targeting these 9 to 10,000 people to eventually you're targeting 100,000, then 1 million, then 5 million, then 20 million, then 300 million Americans all get targeted with a stupid rule. And so that is the progression where some people are looking at it as a static state idea, saying, oh, it's not that bad. It only targets the small amount. It's only according to some of these criteria. But there are other people who are saying, I'm not worried about the static state. I'm worried about the direction of travel here. And that's concerning. And I actually think that that is the right way to look at it, is by introducing something that becomes a rule. It is much easier to tweak the rule than go from the rule doesn't exist to the rule exists. And so if you are going to resist, or as a population have your voice heard, now is the time to remind them how unpopular this idea is, versus, oh, it's just targeting these 9,000 people. And please don't make it go from 9,000 to 100,000. That's much harder to stop.
Yeah. And I don't know. To me, it just feels like this would be a huge philosophical departure from of the United States on how, because they've never taxed this before, but also just personally, I feel like it's wrong to tax people on money they don't have.
Well, it's money that you don't have, which I think is a very fair critique of this. But also, when you start to introduce taxation that only works in one direction, it causes a lot of complexity and introduces kind of volatility and unknown chaos. And so the best example would be if I spend $100 at the beginning of the year and I buy a stock. And let's say that stock goes from $100 to $300. It's a great year for the stock. That $300 has a $100 cost basis, so there's $200 of profit. If they're going to tax me at, let's say, 25%, then I don't do public math, but I owe $50, right? Because $200, 25%, $50 tax. But if all of a sudden I pay my taxes at the end of the year, and the next year the stock goes from $300 back to, let's say, $100, there is no part of the plan where they give me a tax refund or a tax credit. So what you really are doing is you are essentially taxing things that go up in value, regardless of whether people make the money or not. And so historically, the only time that you get taxed is when you sell, which is what we want to incentivize. Taxation is this very weird dynamic where many people look at it as a zero-sum game. Either you get the money or the government gets the money. While I do think that that is true, the more important analysis is what is the incentive that they are introducing into the market. And by introducing a tax on unrealized capital gains, you are introducing an incentive that would force people to sell assets. For a economy, you actually want to incentivize long-term holding of assets. You want people to hold stocks for the long run. You want people to hold real estate for the long run. You want people to be invested in the future. If you introduce taxation that forces people to sell assets, you are essentially forcing the population to go short on the future. And so that is a destructive policy for the future of America, because now what you are doing is you are punishing success.
Yeah.
You made an investment. It started to work in your direction. We immediately are going to take stuff regardless of what the outcome ends up being. And so I think that, people are stuck on the nuance and the details of the policy. To me, the bigger challenge here is you are essentially taking something where the U.S. government and their tax policy today incentivizes investment, incentivizes long-term thinking, right? There's literally a difference between short-term and long-term capital gains rates. You're incentivizing people to kind of continue to build and allocate resources with this long time horizon. And if you switch it to a short time horizon and you switch it to something where you disincentivize long-term holding, that is something that I think actually pushes the country in the wrong direction. And so I don't think that this will get passed, but I think it is a fantastic idea for them to keep suggesting every couple of years, because people get more and more desensitized to it. And also it creates massive chaos and controversy, which then has this Streisand effect, which now everyone is talking about Harris's economic policy. And regardless of whether they're good ideas or bad ideas, people are talking about her.
Yeah.
People are talking about the policy. And there's a lot of studies that show the Streisand effect actually can help a politician, regardless of whether it's good or bad talking. They're talking about you, which is maybe something that she's actually trying to accomplish right now.
I do wonder how much of it is, let's throw this idea out there again and see how people think about it. And then
and both politicians do it. right? We've seen many ideas come from President Trump where he has suggested something, he sees the crowd reaction, and then he goes and he keeps hammering on that talking point, right? In a weird way, no tax on tips. Now, both politicians are claiming that they are going to implement no tax on tips. Trump told a story where I think he was at a restaurant or a hotel, and the waitress suggested it to him. And then he went and he told the story.
That's crazy.
And the reaction obviously was incredibly positive. And so he realized, oh, the people want this. Because one of the interesting things about politicians is, everyone is always worried about, what is your thought process? In a weird way, the politician is actually the representative of the people. And so the politician should be asking the people, what do you guys want?
Of course.
I'll go represent your wishes. But if you actually look at the critique process, the campaign process, a lot of people ask the campaign or the politician, what is your belief on this topic? And so I always have thought that politicians kind of paint themselves in the wrong corner where they constantly want to say what they believe. Mm-hmm. But the true test of leadership would be, can you represent the will of the people, even if it goes against what you personally believe? That is your job.
Thing to do.
Nearly impossible for a politician, especially in today's day and era.
Yeah. Okay. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell laid the groundwork Friday for interest rate cuts ahead, likely to happen in September. It's the clearest indication yet that the Fed is on track to cut interest rates next month for the first time since 2020. I remember those cuts, as worries about the health of the economy mount. Powell said the time has come for policy to adjust. The direction of travel is clear, and the timing and pace of rate cuts will depend on incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. He also added that inflation has declined significantly. The labor market is no longer overheated. Is this true? And conditions are now less tight than those that prevailed before the pandemic. Supply constraints have normalized, and the balance of the risks to our two mandates has changed.
So it's definitely true that the economy has cooled, that many of the metrics that they're looking at suggest, now is the time.
They did their job, basically.
They did their job. Today's episode is brought to you by Gemini. Gemini is a fantastic platform. How do I know? Because I've used it for years. These guys get it. They right now have a special offer where they are offering all eligible new users the opportunity to earn $100 in Bitcoin. That's right, 100 big ones. They're going to give out in Bitcoin if you go and you trade $1,000 in crypto within the first 30 days of signing up. What is Gemini? Gemini builds crypto products that are simple, elegant, and secure. Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss, the billionaire Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss, founded Gemini in 2014 with a security-first mentality and ethos of asking for permission, not forgiveness. They've been pioneers for the crypto industry since day one, and unlike many exchanges, they are available in all 50 US states. Gemini has tools for new and advanced traders. They've got an advanced trading platform called Active Trader, which is where crypto traders go for advanced charting tools, access to over 300 crypto trading pairs, and multiple order types to trade the way you want. Head over to Gemini.com/partners/pomp and start trading with Gemini today to earn $100 in Bitcoin. That's right. Gemini will give you $100 in Bitcoin if you head over to Gemini.com/partners/pomp and you trade $1,000 in crypto within the first 30 days. Right. And, the Federal Reserve will always kind of be behind the curve because they are looking at data and metrics that are backwards looking. You get the inflation number after the month has expired. You get the consumer spending number, not in real time, but after the people have spent money. Mm-hmm. And so they're looking at backwards data, trying to make a decision today with the prediction of the decision that's made today, how it will affect the future. So backwards data for a decision today on how it impacts the future is a very hard task to do. And so they will always be behind the curve because of that backwards looking data. Now, there are many people who criticize the Federal Reserve, including myself. I think that they have made many mistakes throughout the years. And you could even argue that maybe the human intervention of monetary policy is not the right way to set up the system. But if you are going to criticize them, you also have to give them credit when they do something that is right. And the one thing that I think that they have done very well is they went from a high inflation environment where they essentially had exhausted all of their stimulus tools. They printed trillions of dollars along with fiscal policy decision makers, and they had suppressed interest rates down to zero. inflation took off. They have been able to bring inflation down. I won't argue about the exact data point of the official metrics versus the unofficial, but inflation has definitely come down, or the rate of change. And they were able to essentially reload their ammunition. And so if you think about it from the sense of, they were fighting the economy. The economy was slowing down, and so they wanted to stimulate it in 2020. And so they came in and they shot all their bullets. Mm-hmm. Well, the economy took off, and so the bullets worked. But now all of a sudden, you've got a Federal Reserve that's shot all their bullets. If all of a sudden you need to fight again, you don't have any ammunition in the gun. And so what they have done from 2022 until today is they reloaded. They literally went and they were able to get interest rates back over 5%. And they were able to sell about $2 trillion of assets off their balance sheet in the last 2 years. So now, if there is some sort of economic slowdown, a market downturn, or even a recession, the Fed can step in and they've got all these bullets they can fire again. They could go cut 200 or 300 basis points of interest rates and still only be at 2.5% interest rates. So they have a lot of room to work with there. Also, they haven't been stimulating the economy. And so they could go print a couple $1 trillion and they would just get right back to where they just were in 2022 in terms of their balance sheet. And so what's interesting to me is people don't want to give them credit for that reload. Everyone wants to yell and scream about what happened in 2020 and 2021, which rightfully they should be criticized for. But to give them credit, they have reloaded successfully. The economy did not crash. It is now starting to slow. And so they're ready to stimulate. And so then you go and you look at, okay, he's hinting at stimulating in September. He's going to cut interest rates. What is telling or noteworthy about that is that right now, stocks, crypto, and gold are all at or near all-time high prices. Because because stocks, crypto, and gold are at or near all-time high prices, and the Fed has not been stimulating the economy, that would suggest that when they start to stimulate the economy, that asset prices are going to continue to grow. They're going to take off because you're going to get interest rates going down. So cheap capital will start to flood into the market. And then on top of that, you also likely are going to start getting some quantitative easing measures on the fiscal side where they're going to print money as well. And so one of the other data points that then enters into this is how much capital has gone into treasuries and other money market funds, et cetera, because of the high interest rates. So once interest rates got over 5%, what we've seen is take money market funds. Money market funds have hit over $6.4 trillion in terms of assets in these money market funds. That is an all-time high. So investors took all this cash and they put it into money market funds to get a higher yield.
Yeah.
Well, when interest rates come down, those people are going to say, I liked it when it was over 5%.
Yeah.
If it's 3%, it's not really worth me leaving my money in a money market fund. So that capital is going to leave the money market funds and go into equities or other assets. On top of that, we have seen countries around the world, people like China and others, that historically have been very large owners of U.S. treasuries. At one point, China and Japan alone bought over 20% of all U.S. treasury issuance. Today, that number is closer to 6 or 7%. They have been offloading their treasury ownership. Now, why is that important? The central banks historically have actually been non-economic buyers of U.S. treasuries. They didn't care where interest rates were. They weren't buying it for the interest rate. They were buying it for the safety net of treasuries, the full backing of the and full faith and credit of the U.S. government. But they have been selling. Who are they selling to? They are selling to financial investors, large financial institutions, et cetera, who are very sensitive to rates. So what I think is going to happen here is they're going to start to cut rates. Equities, crypto, gold, et cetera, is going to start to take off. Then everyone holding bonds is finally going to get punished for the stupid decision of allocating to an asset that is only guaranteed to lose value over time. And then you're going to have that interest rate coming down, which means yields come down. And as yields come down, you're going to see money flow out of money market funds, treasuries, et cetera, which will accelerate the decline of bonds and will then start to beg the question of who is going to be the net new buyer of treasuries for the U.S. government? Because if they are going to start spending, they need someone to buy the debt. And so it's the whole complex system that kind of reinforces itself where when they cut interest rates, asset prices go up, but also there's going to be negative side effects to the treasury market, which then will introduce the kind of reinforcement of capital fleeing out of treasuries into these assets, which push them higher. And so him returning to kind of an easy money policy is great from a financial standpoint if you are long. The one thing I will call out that is also coming, if he cuts in September, you are going to hear yelling and screaming from the Republicans because they are going to claim election interference. They are going to say, you have kept interest rates high throughout much of the last 2 years. You did not cut in Q1. You did not cut in Q2. You waited till we were within 100 days of the election, and then you started to cut interest rates and push asset prices up so that people feel like things are going well under the quote unquote incumbent. And so therefore you are actually helping the Biden-Harris administration, which really is the Harris candidate. And so Trump has already called for saying you should not cut before the election. But we also don't want the central bankers making monetary policy decisions because they're looking at an election calendar.
Right.
So regardless of whether they are actually doing it because of the election or not, the Republicans are going to criticize them because it is so close to the election.
Yeah, but it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. If they cut it now, if they wait until after the election, if it's Trump, and then it's the whole thing.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't is the life of a central banker. That is the motto of that role, because many times you are facing a lose-lose situation. Yeah. If you cut, you get criticized. If you don't cut, you may push the country into, kind of a bad economic situation. And so if you're facing that decision, if you're Jerome Powell, you have to be okay if one political party attacks you, because ultimately you're going to be judged on the success of the economy, not on whether you have friends in the Republican Party or not.
Interesting. And what does this mean? Is this good news for people who own or want to buy Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and alternative assets like that?
Having cheaper capital entering the market will always be good for investors structurally, right? It means that you can borrow more money. It means that people are investing more historically. It means that asset prices are going up, et cetera. Now, the caveat is if you invest in a bad company, it can still go to zero. Right. So it's not just like, indiscriminately, go and put money everywhere. But also what I think ends up being a reminder to people is from a structural standpoint, if you hold cash, you lose purchasing power. If you invest in investable assets and wait, the central bank will do your job for you. They will devalue the currency. They will push asset prices up, and over a long enough time frame, stocks always go up, Bitcoin always goes up, gold always goes up, real estate always goes up, etc. And it is because that structural advantage where these assets are priced in dollars, the dollar gets devalued, and somebody who is going to buy the asset from you in the future needs more dollars to buy it from you than what it would take today. And so that is the best argument that someone can make for why we need to become a nation of investors, not a nation of savers. The challenge historically has been that most people who are, let's say, under the age of 50, if they were to ask their parents or their grandparents, what should I do financially? Their grandparents would say, save. Spend less than you make and save. And people will critique them and say that's bad advice. But the nuance is that's bad advice today. That was great advice in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, because you could save your way to financial security. Today, you can't do that. And so who you get advice from sometimes is more important than the advice that you get.
Because like maybe our generation will be telling our kids and grandkids, you got to invest, you got to diversify your portfolio, when maybe in reality they should be saving in the future.
Maybe there's a different strategy, but the structural setup of the world that we live in today is very important to understand. And so blindly just saving is actually a guaranteed way to lose purchasing power. Investing obviously is what can protect and grow your purchasing power.
Fantastic. Some
what do you
really
got
good
next?
Stats in there. I got the Telegram CEO was arrested in France. Pavel Durov, the Russian-born billionaire founder and owner of the Telegram messaging app, was arrested in France shortly after landing on a private jet late on Saturday and placed in custody. So I thought it was interesting here that it led people like Elon Musk to say that free speech in Europe was under attack. Lex Friedman also tweeted that his arrest was a disturbing attack on free speech and a threat not just to Telegram, but to any online platform. Governments should not engage in censorship. This is a blatant and deeply troubling overreach of power. I thought it was interesting that all these people kind of jumped to the conclusion that it was over free speech. Like, why?
Well, this may be one of the most complex topics that I've seen kind of play out in the public in a couple of years. I think your concern about everyone jumping to conclusions is valid. I actually think it is dangerous when an event occurs and it's kind of like there's like a social media Olympics. Who can have the hottest take? Who can be first to kind of put forward whatever the latest conspiracy theory is, so that they can get the retweets, the likes, the followers, etc. And so if you can take that kind of concern and say, okay, let's put it to the side and say, we know that there's overreaction. We know there's a lot of kind of information that's spreading that's unconfirmed, et cetera. The reason why I say this is so complex is because there's actually a hint of truth in a lot of what people are saying, even though these people are all disagreeing with each other. So let me give you a couple of examples. There are people who are arguing that this is a free speech issue. To a degree, it is. France is allegedly coming out and saying, well, you own Telegram. Telegram is not moderating speech. It does not have certain security backdoors, and it is not complying with the rules that we have implemented. And therefore, because you are doing that, you are allowing terrorists, drug dealers, bad, nefarious, malicious people to do things. And so you are helping them. You are conspiring to participate, and therefore we're going to arrest you.
Now, sorry, but are terrorists not using other messaging apps?
I saw a fantastic meme on the internet, and I think memes are one of the best ways to communicate ideas in today's society. And it said that France must be looking for the BIC, B-I-C, the pen owner. Because terrorists obviously use a pen to write untraceable messages to each other that are done offline in a secure, anonymous way. And so if we're going to go after Telegram, are we going to go after the pen manufacturer next?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like when that narrative of only criminals and drug dealers use Bitcoin, because actually, they probably use cash.
Of course. So I think that that's like one piece. Yes, there's a free speech thing. Now, there are a lot of questions here, right? And so on one hand, Powell is actually a French citizen. He's a citizen of the UAE and of France. I will get all of the details inaccurate, but for those that don't know, Powell is from Russia. He built the Russian Facebook. He then sold that. He made a couple $100 million off of the Russian Facebook, and he fled Russia.
Why did he flee?
He's told the story a couple of times, and I don't want to kind of misquote him, but essentially there was pressure from the Russian government, and I think that he was fleeing for the avoidance of some of that political pressure, and also kind of this belief that maybe somewhere else, he ended up settling in Dubai, may be better for him, kind of what he wanted to do in the world, etc. So there's this like backstory here, which is pretty interesting. Now, to make it complex, somehow Telegram is either one of, if not the only messaging app available in Russia. And so there are people who critique Telegram and Powell, and they say, hey, well, we think you struck a deal with the Russians where you have given Russia backdoor access to a lot of the messages. Now, that brings up, and again, I'm not saying that that's correct. That's
You're just saying the
critique.
theories that are floating out there.
Now, in order to start to unpack some of the complexity here, we need to go into some of the technical architecture of Telegram. And so I'm going to present this in kind of the simplest way possible. And I can only do this because Ben Thompson of Stratechery, he did a great piece where he basically laid out some of the architectural differences between iMessage, WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram. Now, one of the things you will hear in this conversation is this idea of end-to-end encryption. And so end-to-end encryption, I'll explain in a second, but that is a new phenomenon. Historically on the internet, the way that you secured messages is you had your device, your phone, and the server. And what you would do is from your phone to the server would be encrypted. But when
so if I texted you,
your message would go to the server.
Yes.
From your phone to the server, it is encrypted. No one can read that message.
It's like scrambled. It's like.
But when it gets to the server, the company, let's say Telegram, can read the message. And so on their servers, they can read those messages.
So what's the point?
So because you have done that, they then can send that message to me. And again, they may encrypt it from their server to me. And I get the message that you sent, we can read it, etc. But there is the server, there was an unencrypted message that the company has access to. Got it. Now, people would say, well, that sounds crazy. Why would we ever do that? The reason is because the other option would be end-to-end encryption. End-to-end encryption means that from you to the server to me, the message is fully encrypted. Somebody like Signal, which is considered the most secure, if the government comes to them and says, let us read the messages, they say, we can't. It's end-to-end encrypted. We literally cannot read the message. The problem is that it is very unscalable. So Telegram has found product market fit by creating broadcast channels and very large group chats. You can put, I think, up to 200,000 people in a group chat.
By the way, I keep getting put in these like spam group chats. I'm like, get me out of here.
Of course they're spam, but what it allows for is this very scalable, kind of use case. So crypto has flocked to this. There's a lot of companies, right? They have these broadcast channels, etc. The reason why, from an architecture standpoint, Telegram can do that is because they don't have the end-to-end encryption of the message. Because in end-to-end encryption, whether it's on iMessage or Signal, when you send a message to a group chat, let's say that I think on Signal, on iMessage, you can put up to 32 people, Ben said, in a group chat. You are actually sending 32 separate text messages in that group chat. So if you have 200,000 people in an iMessage chat, you can't send 200,000 messages every single time that you send a text message, right? So they limit the group to 32 people. So that end-to-end encryption is really far, if you think of it like a sliding scale, very secure, not very scalable.
Right.
What Telegram did is Telegram seems to have given choice to the user. They said, look, we have end-to-end encryption available in a secret chat. So you can turn it on essentially. But the default is not end-to-end encryption.
So it's up to the user to change them.
The critique of Telegram is that they present it as a secure service and it leads people to believe that it's end-to-end encrypted, but actually the default is not.
Got it.
And so what they got as a trade-off is this scalability. Now, the reason why that becomes interesting in the conversation with Powell and the arrest is there are messages sitting on the server that can be read. So if a government goes to Telegram and says, give us the messages and somehow is able to convince them to turn them over, they can do that. With Signal, they couldn't.
Even after it's been encrypted and sent to the other person.
I don't know exactly when it gets deleted, et cetera, but I'm sure it sits on the server for some period of time and they probably are, kind of erasing things for storage purposes, whatever. But that is one of the reasons why Powell may be an easier target than, let's say, Tim Cook. Now, the other thing is Powell comes from Russia. I would not underestimate that detail being important given the current environment and conversation around Russia.
Let me just add some context to that. The app has close to 1 billion users, and it's particularly influential in Russia, Ukraine, and the republics of the former Soviet Union. It is ranked as one of the major social media platforms after Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok, and WeChat. Now,
what's funny is that Russian politicians are using Telegram, but also Macron, I think is how you say his name. How you say it?
I don't know. Emmanuel Macron.
Macron, which kind of sounds
that like
whatever, it's fine.
I took French for 7 years. It's embarrassing.
We're good. He is also reportedly a Telegram user.
What? Maybe he doesn't know because maybe he got put in that spam chat like me.
So it would be very, very interesting. And now we are going to leave reality and head towards conspiracy theory land.
Wait,
but it would be very interesting if actually there is some information that Macron has been using on Telegram or sending or participating in that now is being realized it is not end-to-end encrypted. And if somehow Russia or another country or another intelligence agency is able to get that information, my question is, are we actually just watching spy games play out? Are we watching countries all competing with each other on a geopolitical chessboard that we as citizens are unaware of a lot of the details?
But I feel like if that was to be true, making such a big public spectacle of his arrest, and you want to, let's say, hide something or whatever, messages, I don't know.
They didn't make it public. What's interesting is he flew into France on a private jet. He was arrested on the tarmac, according to the reports. The French government didn't say anything for a number of days.
That's true.
The Russians and now UAE has written a letter and said, hey, he's a UAE citizen. What is he charged with? Why do you have him?
Because they wouldn't even release the charges necessarily
at first,
yet. Yeah.
Now they have released them. And so there's a world where they were detaining him. No one even knows it happened. But instead, the internet got a hold of it and it exploded. Now, I want to make this a little bit more complex.
Whew.
Every great man's fall can be traced back to a woman.
Oh, come on.
Incentivizing them to do something.
Oh, come on. Okay. We're about to get in an argument on air.
And so, Powell supposedly has...
No, again, this is a conspiracy.
No, this is fact.
Oh.
This blonde woman who he has been traveling around with.
If I was ever referred to as that brunette woman, go on.
I don't remember her name. But he's been traveling around with her. They were in a number of different countries. And there are some accounts on Twitter that come from the intelligence world. They're now private citizens. But, very quickly, he took this picture and posted it on the Russian Facebook account. She took the exact same picture around the exact same time.
Well, okay,
whatever.
But they're dating. They're excited.
Of course. She was also taking pictures and posting them with geolocation. She was posting from the private jet. She would say where they were headed beforehand.
Does she not know about
in some of the pictures?
End-to-end encryption?
Well, if you're simply just posting it publicly, right? And so there then is a question of, were the French authorities alerted because she was posting on the internet pictures like there's a picture I saw, which is like heading to France.
Right, but how would they know that he's about to get arrested?
They don't.
Exactly.
But the French authorities are probably paying attention. They're saying, hey, if we want to know where this guy is and what he's doing.
It's not the girl's fault.
Seems like this girl is posting quite a bit about their travels. Now, the reason why that is an interesting, kind of addition to the complexity is that reports came out that Powell had been avoiding France because there had been an arrest warrant out for him. And so is there a world, and again, it's a question, it's definitely not a fact, but is there a world where she basically said, I want to go to France, and he said, let's go to France. There's no way that they're actually going to arrest me. And then when he landed, he was arrested. And so again, I somewhat jokingly say the fall of every great man is kind of can be traced back to a woman, but there is a degree of truth to that. There is also a story, if we want to kind of pull on this, the geopolitical impact around the world is more influenced by the relationship between men and women than people want to give it credit for. I saw an article that came out recently. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton did not talk for reportedly 8 months after the Monica Lewinsky story came out.
Who said this?
There's an article, you can Google it. The first time that they talked, reportedly, Hillary Clinton called Bill Clinton and said, you need to bomb a specific foreign nation.
Oh my God, we're getting into Looney Town.
That country was bombed within 24 hours.
But we need to find the source on this.
We can find the source.
Okay.
If that story is true, it is a good example where whether it is Bill and Hillary Clinton, whether the reports of Joe and Jill Biden and her massive influence into certain decisions that are being made in the White House, Powell and his girlfriend, or many other foreign leaders, there is more to the story than is always kind of meets the eye, because you don't understand the interpersonal relationships that people have and who they're influenced by.
I actually agree with you that relationships drive a lot of things, but I think it goes both ways. You could say the downfall of Hillary Clinton was Bill's behavior.
100%. 100%.
A few more like facts out there. So the French government did come out and make a statement. Macron said, France is deeply committed to freedom of expression and communication, to innovation, to the spirit of entrepreneurship. It will remain so. He said that the arrest is part of an ongoing judicial investigation, and it is in no way a political decision. They have this like judge system that will rule on the matter. The Paris prosecutor said that the arrest was part of an investigation opened on July 8th against person unnamed on a raft of potential charges, including complicity. Is that a word? Yeah. Complicity in the distribution of child pornography and selling of drugs, money laundering, and a refusal to cooperate with law enforcement. So this could be we don't know. So it could be part of a much bigger investigation that Powell is under.
Today's episode is brought to you by Zappo Bank. Let this sink in for a moment. Over $500 billion in Bitcoin has been lost or stolen. Whether that is misplaced hardware wallets or an exchange that went bust, the risks are very real. That's why I think where and how you store your Bitcoin is absolutely critical. Now meet Zappo Bank, the world's first fully licensed and regulated Bitcoin-enabled bank. They're known as the Fort Knox of Bitcoin. With over a decade of expertise in Bitcoin custody, they blend no holdback security, including military-grade Swiss bunkers, cutting-edge digital protocols, and strict regulatory oversight. This comprehensive approach ensures your funds are always protected no matter what. With Zappo Bank, you can grow your wealth with interest paid out daily in Bitcoin. You can spend anywhere with zero FX fees using their global card, or you can make instant payments with the Lightning Network. Head over to zappobank.com/pomp to join. That's XAPOBANK.com/pomp. Go check out Zappo Bank today.
True. Which I think it goes back to like everyone jumping to the conclusion that it's just merely a free speech thing. My guess is that the reports that he had been avoiding France and he was aware of the arrest warrant, etc., are probably false. The way that makes it sound is that there was an arrest warrant out for, less than 60 days. And he probably didn't know. He probably went there. He's a French citizen, arrested on the tarmac. He was surprised, right? And now he's become kind of this political pawn.
And tell me what you were mentioning about Mark Zuckerberg kind of being under political pressure. Like, this is not something that would be totally out of left field.
Well, Mark Zuckerberg in the last couple of days wrote a letter to a political committee, and he essentially said, listen, we were pressured by the Biden-Harris administration to censor speech, sometimes even satire and comedy. We were pressured to take down certain information during COVID-19, and we were pressured to derank or prevent the dissemination of the Hunter Biden laptop story.
And hold on a second. Them being pressured, I understand. I'm sure it happens. But Mark Zuckerberg is the CEO of Meta. He is the ultimate final, like the buck stops with him. Why could he say no? Couldn't he say no?
It depends. If he really wanted to say no, he could sue the U.S. government. He'd go to the Supreme Court. There's certain things that could happen. But I think part of what I took away from the letter was his conclusion. If he had to do it over again, he wouldn't have done it. But they didn't know what they didn't know at the time. So if the U.S. government comes to you and they say, hey, there's this laptop story, it's fake. Here's 51 intelligence officers that are saying it's fake. It is disinformation. It is, potentially Russian propaganda, whatever. If you take the word of the person talking to you and you don't think kind of critically. You don't come at it from a degree of skepticism.
Facebook is not an investigative journalism organization.
What they said they did is actually they took the information, they sent it to a group of fact checkers, and in the meantime, they deprioritized that content on the platform. In the meantime. And then the fact checkers came back, and the fact checkers actually said it is fake.
Yeah.
It turns out it wasn't fake. And so now one of the rule changes that Facebook is making is that if they receive information that is supposedly fake or disinformation, etc., they will not deprioritize it while fact checkers are looking at it. And so he's making these changes internally. But the more important thing is Mark Zuckerberg was issuing a warning to politicians, very soft power warning, but a warning saying, I won't be bullied anymore. You are not going to come tell us to censor Americans. Enough is enough.
Yeah.
So he said it very diplomatically. He said it, eloquently. But if you read into what he's saying in there, he's putting his thoughts on record saying, enough.
Yeah.
You did it to us before. It was wrong. We're not going to be complicit in this in the future. And so Powell, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, you're very quickly starting to build a coalition of the owners of these properties who are saying different countries, different governments, different reasons why, different stories. The governments are pressuring us to censor you all. That shouldn't be a surprise to us. Of course, governments all around the world don't want people criticizing them, spreading what they deem misinformation.
This is America.
Well, America does a fantastic job of publicly presenting a very clean-cut, cologne-filled, beautiful perspective.
Ford models.
But there are plenty of examples of America, unfortunately, and I say this as someone who loves this country, things that we've done that maybe we gave ourselves a black eye. Things that maybe if we could go back, we would have done differently. At the end of the day, a government is just made up of people.
Yeah.
People have to make decisions. And if you think that people in the government aren't susceptible to fear and greed and personal incentives and ego and, all these different things, you're crazy. Of course they are. And so if you give power to those people, of course they're going to use it. And so it then begs this question of, if you're running a social media platform or a messaging platform, what should you do? And if you kind of bring this full circle, one of the best things that you can do for some, mainly the messaging, is build end-to-end encryption. Because now when they come and they pressure you, you say, I can't stop it. Right? It is the entire argument for Bitcoin. It is the entire argument for decentralization and crypto is rather than build these centralized services, which you got speed and performance and monetization and all these amazing, kind of benefits for a corporation, we may be entering a time in history where decentralization is really important because we need to be able to resist the pressures of the state or anybody who is trying to pressure these companies.
Yeah.
And because it is so hard to say no, you have to almost be able to say, I can't. It is impossible to be able to do that.
I just think that, stating the obvious, but I think it's just very, very hard for one individual to go up against a government and say no, or say, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to reveal my sources or the messages or whatever. In the United States, there have been cases where journalists, the government wants their sources. The journalist says no, and then they're held in contempt of court. They can go to prison. So it's things like that where it's like,
I got respect for those people.
Yeah, it sounds really like, oh, of course I wouldn't give up my source, and then you're in the situation.
I forget the name of the movie. But there's a movie, I think it's about the Valerie Plum CIA case. And for those that don't know, Valerie Plum, I believe was
she was a CIA
operative, but she was also a source for a article. The journalist actually went to jail.
Yes.
And so if you think about it again,
certain states have sunshine laws that protect journalists, but the federal government does not.
So, again, let me take off my proud American hat and put on my critiquer of the American government. If somebody in another country was to write a headline of that and they wrote, America jails journalist,
Right.
The perception would be, oh my God, there's no free speech. There's no protection of the press. There's all this kind of stuff. Now, again, the details, the nuance of the case and the court and contempt. It
endangered the CIA operative's life.
All of this stuff, right? It makes it very, very complex. But that is why headlines are so dangerous and actually looking at the facts.
Yeah.
But I think that the reverse is true. Many times we will read the headlines from other countries, but we don't have the information yet. And so, again, if I was a betting person today and you put a gun to my head and you said, what is the Powell situation? Based on what we know now, there's probably something around he's not giving up information, he's not cooperating, he's not willing to violate kind of the free speech of his users. And so that is why they're detaining him.
You do think that?
Based on what we know, that's the higher probability. But I would not count out all of the other complexities playing much more of a role than probably it appears on the face. And the reason why I think that is because Macron wrote like a 2-page defense
Oh, I just saw that one
of
tweet.
France saying this is not a political decision. This has nothing to do with politics. This is what you pretty much only write that if that's exactly what it is.
You are a politician.
But you only feel like it, to me, when I read that,
yeah. It makes
like
you more skeptical.
You're projecting your insecurities around what you're actually doing.
But wouldn't you say the same if it really wasn't a political situation and he's trying to say it is not? Like,
no, because if it's such a ridiculous theory, you wouldn't even feel the need to address it. Now, here is what is funny to me. The French government has been spending a lot of time, money, and energy doing outreach and marketing to try to turn France into a startup hub of Europe. What startup founder wants to go build in a country where they are arresting the founder of a technology platform that will protect users?
But again, we don't know that yet. So it could be something else.
Perception is reality in that case, because when you are playing a global competition game for startup hubs, you don't have the luxury of people learning the facts. They only look at the perception, unfortunately. And even if everything that the French government is saying is true, from a national perspective, an interesting question would be, is it worth arresting Powell and shutting down Telegram if it costs you all future startup growth in your country?
I don't know. I'm not Macron.
I'm not either. But those are the questions that, if politicians really are involved in this stuff, begin to enter into the equation, because now you're doing a calculation on job growth, GDP growth, tax revenue, right? Innovation, all these things that really are long-term thinking and long-term benefit for what is the expectation, right? Like, again, if you were to go and you were to talk to the people arresting Powell, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think you're going to shut down Telegram? Do you think that you're going to, if you jail Powell, do you think Telegram goes away? I don't know what they think, but it is unclear.
But again, nobody is above the law. If he genuinely did something bad, should he not get arrested?
From what I understand from even the charges, if you take everything as to what they're saying, they're not saying that he actually participated in this stuff.
Right.
They're simply saying that you created a platform that allowed people to have these conversations. But again, the meme is the message. Then should you go arrest the Bic Pen CEO because he created a piece of technology that bad people are using to communicate with each other?
I think we wait and see kind of what comes out of it, and then we'll have more informed opinions.
I think that's fair.
And leave the blonde lady out of it. So let's get into the astronauts who are stranded in space. This is like my worst nightmare. Like, of all the places to be stranded.
Before you go any further.
They are not stranded?
No, They are stranded. I want to give a shout out to Delian Asparov,
he's from Bulgaria.
Who very early on called out and said, there are 2 astronauts stranded in space. He was actually community noted.
Oh, really?
On Twitter. And NASA's official position was they're not stranded. It's just delayed for them to get back.
Okay.
It turns out they were stranded.
What is the...
And again, if you approach the news with an eye of skepticism,
right,
and you're willing to do critical thinking and independent thinking, you probably would have realized earlier, maybe not on day one like Delian, but earlier than now. I think there's 2 astronauts stranded in space and we can't get them back right now.
It's crazy. So what happened was there were 2 astronauts who were supposed to be there for like a test flight mission for 8 or 9 days. And then they ended up saying for 8 or 9 months. They're going to be coming back in February as of now. Boeing will return its Starliner capsule. Did it already return it from the ISS without them? That it delivered to orbit. Yeah, the test flight was originally intended to last about 8 or 9 days. They've been there since June.
Let's talk about Boeing for a second.
Okay.
There's a gentleman, Porter Stansberry, who wrote a piece maybe now 2 years ago. Much earlier than the planes falling apart. And in that piece, he essentially was criticizing Boeing. He was calling for a decline in their stock price. And what he said, which I found very fascinating, was Boeing used to be the pinnacle of American engineering as a company. It was all about engineering excellence. But leadership is no longer full of engineers. It is now full of financiers and MBAs. And so it is
MBAs.
And so it has become a business that is run by spreadsheets, not by the engineering excellence. And therefore, when you run a business by a spreadsheet, you're constantly looking to cut costs. You're constantly looking to strip things out. You don't care as much about the excellence of the engineering or the culture of the business. You are trying to extract value from it for shareholders. And
that becomes dangerous when your business is an airline.
For some businesses, you can get away with it. But when you are an engineering business, if you do not have engineering excellence, it leads to problems. And so it's very apparent what's been happening in commercial airlines. It's scary. When it comes to space, SpaceX was laughed at for 2 decades. But now SpaceX, who pioneered reusable rockets, who is sending all sorts of things into space at a lower cost, who is scheduled for the first private spacewalk coming up here in the next few days.
That's how they canceled it.
They pushed it back 2 or 3 days because of a helium leak.
Right. And that's one of the things that's wrong with the Starliner.
And so Boeing, the pride of America, this great American engineering business, cannot bring them back from space. SpaceX is going to go up. So this is a prime example of the incumbent had the contract. The incumbent had the job. They can't do it. So now the challenger, SpaceX, is going to go get them. And what we are watching is we're watching a shift because SpaceX is an engineering company. SpaceX does pursue the excellence that Boeing used to. We are watching the innovator's dilemma play out. Boeing is eating itself and falling apart, while SpaceX is accelerating and becoming a bigger, better, faster, better economic choice for the government. And so as that shift occurs, you're going to see more and more SpaceX wins, Boeing loses, but also the game is already over. People, if you look at it at a static point in time, you might say Boeing is a big company, SpaceX is that, whatever. It's over already because the direction of progress, the trend for both of these companies, Boeing has now entered into a phase of their business where it is nearly impossible to turn around. When you go from engineering to spreadsheets, the spreadsheet people will never hire an engineer to run the company.
Yeah. And I think, just from a marketing perspective, I think if you ask a person on the street who is the CEO of Boeing versus who is the CEO of SpaceX, they're probably going to know SpaceX. I think in terms of the public perception of the company.
You don't have to go out on the street. I don't know who the CEO of Boeing is.
I don't.
Right?
I think I used to, but
again, it's about engineering versus financial engineering. And the true engineering that you would think of when you're building rockets and space vehicles, etc., that is what you need to be able to do this successfully. You don't need the financial engineering. And so what is interesting is that if you go and you look at GE over the years, Jack Welch is considered one of the great CEOs of the past couple decades.
He was the first kind of celebrity CEO.
He also probably destroyed the company.
But then his successors were kind of blamed for a lot of the missteps that.
He was fantastic at financial engineering, and he was able to get the stock price to go up. And so Wall Street celebrated him. But if you strip away the soul of a company as you pursue that financial engineering, and then you hand the bag to somebody else, it's not the greatest legacy. I think Jack Welch has incredible leadership lessons, but it's very hard to argue that long-term thinking was not part of that strategy in what they did with that business.
Interesting.
Boeing appears very similar. And so maybe the last thing that I'll say is SpaceX, the best data point you can see where SpaceX continues to be long-term thinking is a company that has been around for 23 years and it's not public. It's a private company.
Right. I was going to say that there's a public-private narrative here too.
As a private company. Now, there's a lot of capital available to them. They're one of the most popular private companies in the world. They have a line out the door of people who want to invest in the company. But to stay private for 23 years is a testament, I think, to the long-term thinking, to the pursuit of engineering excellence, not financial engineering. And so, we should say that hopefully the astronauts get back safely. We should also start asking questions about if we have companies that are responsible for the manufacturing and engineering of commercial airlines and many other products, and we know that their cultures have been eroded away, the engineering excellence may not be there, and other things have degraded at the company, how do we create oversight? How do we check? How do we instill confidence in the consumer to get on a Boeing flight? I don't have those answers, but it would only take one plane crashing and people dying for there to be a massive controversy and people trying to figure it out. And so, I hope for the sake of Boeing, their shareholders, their employees, their investors,
the people of America,
people who use their products, that Boeing can turn around. I just wouldn't be willing to bet on it because I think an engineering company who loses its way on engineering, it is very, very hard to reinstill that.
You don't think it's possible for somebody to come in and say, we're putting a premium on engineering, we're going to?
It's always possible, right? And nothing is impossible. And if you had the right leader go in and they were able to kind of, fully
Mobilize
implement their
the
plan,
people,
their plan, all that stuff, it's possible. It's just, think about if you take an engineer and you put them in a room of MBAs, even if the engineer is the CEO, but they're surrounded by MBAs on the board, in all the committees, their direct reports, the MBAs will make sure to eat the engineer because the engineer represents a threat to them and their ability to continue working at the company. Now, again, it's an overgeneralization to engineer an MBA, but the spreadsheets versus the mechanics. Those two people can't coexist in the boardroom. It's very difficult. They have different ways of looking at everything. They actually think each one of them is not as valuable as they think they're, the people similar to them are.
Question for you. What would you do if you were stranded in space? I'd be calling Houston every day, multiple times.
I think that they're probably doing their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, what can you do? Have they said anything?
I think that NASA probably does not want to popularize the idea that there are two astronauts stranded in space.
They're just delayed.
Hence the community note, hence the, kind of NASA position that, it's just a delayed situation.
I would be so pissed, guys. 8 days versus 8 months is a big difference.
I mean, it's probably not the first time. Hopefully it is the last time, but just given the number of trips that people are taking, it's kind of this very weird situation. But thankfully, Elon Musk and reusable rockets will go and get them.
Yeah, that's great. That's all I have for you today.
Thanks so much for everyone watching.
Wait, I want to say something to the people. So this is our second episode. The last one, we asked you to leave a comment if you enjoyed it and whether we should continue recording this. We got like 500 comments, which was insane. I read every single one. So thank you. What I want to ask people is, as we're kind of still, making sure this is valuable content, can you leave a comment with feedback and suggestions on what you want to see more of? We're kind of both doing the topic selection throughout the week, but if you have certain topics in mind that you think should be covered more, let us know in the comments.
I like that plan. See you guys next week. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode. That was one of my favorites. Now, we got a lot of things to talk about because I spent a lot of time making this podcast or these videos, and now I need your help. There's a couple things you can do to help the show get bigger, get in front of more people. The first, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the like button. The more likes there are per video, the more people that see it. It's pretty simple. Now, if you're an audio listener, you don't like video, you don't like seeing my beautiful face, then you can go to Apple, Spotify, or any other audio platform and leave a review. Hit 5 stars, leave a nice comment, help us promote the show. On top of that, I got a brand new book coming out September 24th. It's called How to Live an Extraordinary Life. I wrote 65 letters to my children. Go on Amazon, wherever you like to buy books, search How to Live an Extraordinary Life, Anthony Pompliano. It'll pop up. It's a nice black cover. Go ahead and hit that buy button so you can pre-order the book as well. Now, if you like the show, tell your friends, share it with your family, annoy your brother, your sister, your mother, or your father, and make sure that they become a listener and a watcher as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next episode.